At 85, Al Pacino isn't just aging, he's unraveling in plain sight. The voice that once roared now trembles. Behind the legacy lies loneliness, regret, and fading strength. This isn't just a Hollywood story. It's a human one. What happened to Al Pacino will break your heart if you're brave enough to look. The voice that changed Hollywood. At 85, Al Pacino's voice still carries the weight of 1,000 lives. Raspy, deliberate, unmistakable. But that unforgettable sound is only part of the story. Behind it lies a life filled with hunger, heartbreak, and survival. He was born in 1940 in East Harlem, raised in the South Bronx, a place where struggle wasn't a phase. It was the air you breathed. His father left when he was 2. That silence, the absence of a male figure, was the first ghost that followed him. He lived in a cramped apartment with his mother and grandparents. Poverty wasn't just financial, it was emotional. "I wasn't poor because I had no money. I was poor because I had no power," he once said. Pacino wasn't a golden boy. He wasn't polished or prepped for stardom. In his teens, he drifted. He skipped classes, smoked too much, drank too early. Arrested once for carrying a concealed weapon, he wasn't headed for a red carpet. He was headed for trouble. But there was something inside him that didn't fit the streets. Something aching to speak. Acting became his escape. Not fame, not glamour, just the chance to feel, loudly and honestly. The stage was his salvation. He studied at the legendary actor's studio, slept on floors, walked to auditions because he couldn't afford the subway. The struggle wasn't romantic. It was brutal. But it taught him something deeper than technique. Truth. Every performance he gave came from real places, real wounds, real longing. He once described acting as digging into your own darkness so someone else might feel seen. And that's what he did, over and over again. But in the beginning, no one was watching. He did off-Broadway shows in empty rooms, waited tables, took odd jobs. Still, he kept going, not because he believed he'd make it big, but because acting was the only place where his pain became power. That's why, when success finally found him, it didn't look like a miracle. It looked like a cost. Because for Al Pacino, every line spoken, every character broken, came from the pieces of a life never fully healed. And in 1972, the world would finally listen. Becoming Michael Corleone and paying the price. When The Godfather hit theaters in 1972, audiences didn't just meet Michael Corleone. They witnessed the birth of a myth and the slow erasure of the man behind it. Al Pacino wasn't supposed to get the role. Studio heads thought he was too small, too shy, too unknown. But director Francis Ford Coppola fought for him because he saw what others didn't. Beneath the hesitation was a storm waiting to be controlled. "I wasn't trying to be powerful," Pacino once said. "I was trying not to be swallowed alive." The pressure was enormous. If he failed, his career was over before it started. And during early test screenings, execs wanted him fired. But then came the restaurant scene. Michael shooting Sollozzo and McCluskey. One moment, one quiet transformation, and suddenly, nobody questioned him again. Michael Corleone wasn't loud. He wasn't explosive. He was controlled, cold, devastatingly still. And Pacino, with nothing but his eyes, changed what power looked like on screen forever. But there was a cost. That role didn't just elevate him, it consumed him. People began to confuse the man with the character. Fans called him Michael in public. Directors offered him the same quiet, intense roles. And slowly, Pacino began to retreat behind the very persona he created. He rarely gave interviews. He stopped enjoying the spotlight. Fame had become a mask, and it fit too well. People thought I was cold because Michael was, but I wasn't. I was just tired, he admitted. The Godfather trilogy brought him global fame, awards, wealth, but it also buried parts of him. Every sequel was a deeper dive into emotional detachment, and in real life, he began to mirror it. Friends said he became harder to reach, more private, always chasing the next role, but never really present. He was no longer acting characters. He was bleeding through them. And when he moved from Michael to Serpico, to Tony Montana, to Frank Slade, the pain only deepened. Each performance was more intense than the last. Critics praised him. Audiences worshipped him. But off-screen, Al Pacino was disappearing. The curse of perfection. Al Pacino never played his characters. He became them. And that, more than anything, was both his gift and his curse. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, he wasn't just acting. He was living inside pain, wearing it like a second skin. From the tortured whistleblower in Serpico to the bank robber desperate for love in Dog Day Afternoon, to the cocaine-fueled explosion of rage in Scarface, every role demanded pieces of him, and he gave them, all of them. He didn't believe in half measures. He'd vanish into characters for weeks, months. Sometimes he didn't come back right away. "You go so far into a role," he once said, "you forget how to be you." On set, he was intense, focused, often isolated. He'd miss meals, forget to sleep. If the character was broken, so was he. Directors admired his commitment. Co-stars praised his brilliance. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. He had no interest in fame, no patience for celebrity. After filming ended, he wouldn't attend parties or show up for photo ops. Instead, he'd vanish. Friends said he'd sometimes lock himself away for days. No calls, no lights, just silence. It wasn't mysterious. It was exhaustion. And the deeper the roles got, the heavier they became. During Scarface, he injured his hand on set during the infamous chainsaw scene. Production halted. He returned days later, still bleeding. The pain wasn't just physical. That film pushed him to the edge, mentally, emotionally. Tony Montana's rage became his. The spiral felt real, too real. "I've lost myself in characters," he once admitted, "and not always found my way out." Friends tried to reach him. Some drifted away. Others stayed, worried. They said he was both magnetic and distant. The most brilliant man in the room, yet never fully there. His pursuit of greatness left no space for balance. He had no routine, no boundaries. His entire identity fused with the next script, the next transformation. Awards came. Applause, praise, respect. But they were short-lived highs. When the curtain fell, the emptiness returned. And maybe that's what no one tells you about perfection. It's lonely. It isolates you. It demands everything, gives back little, and refuses to let you rest. By the end of the 80s, Pacino wasn't burned out. He was drifting, quietly, slowly, withdrawing from the machine he'd fed for so long. And when people asked where he'd gone, the truth was simple. He was still out there, just not as himself anymore. The love he never held on to. For all the passion Al Pacino brought to the screen, his real life remained filled with unanswered questions. and love that kept slipping through his fingers. He never married, not once, not because he didn't believe in love, but because he couldn't hold still long enough to let it grow. The intensity that made him so electrifying in his work made him complicated at home. He had long, meaningful relationships with women like Diane Keaton, Beverly D'Angelo, Lucilla Sola, but each one ended in distance. Diane once said, "He was always somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't follow." That somewhere was usually a film set, or the deep isolation that came after. Even when he wasn't filming, his mind was somewhere inside a script, a memory, a storm that never settled. Pacino has 3 children, twins with Beverly, and a daughter from a brief earlier relationship. He's admitted that fatherhood didn't come easy to him. "I didn't know how to be a dad. I tried, but I didn't grow up with one, so I was always learning too late." He loved his children deeply, but he often loved them from a distance, too caught up in work, in internal struggles, to always be present. And when the cameras stopped, when the crowds faded, what was left was silence. A quiet house, a man surrounded by memories, not companionship. He's spoken in interviews about regret, not for missed roles, but for missed moments. The dinners skipped, the birthdays delayed, the relationships that could have lasted had he just been able to slow down. "You give so much to the work," he said. "Sometimes there's nothing left for real life." It's not that he didn't want love. He did. But love requires consistency. And Pacino was a man of chaos, of emotion, of obsession. He chased the truth in his characters, but sometimes ignored the truths in his personal life. At 85, he lives alone, still active, still working, but undeniably alone. He doesn't complain about it, doesn't wallow, but it's there, in his eyes, in the way he speaks about the past with more sorrow than nostalgia. In one interview, he was asked if he feared dying alone. He paused, then said softly, "No, I've always been alone, even in a room full of people." And maybe that's the hardest part to accept, that a man who gave the world so much emotion spent most of his life struggling to feel truly loved. The battle with inner darkness. Al Pacino's talent was undeniable. His presence was electric. But what few knew, what he rarely talked about, was the darkness behind the curtain. During the 1980s, while his fame soared, his spirit quietly began to sink. He was exhausted. Decades of intensity, character immersion, and solitude had taken their toll. Away from the screen, he was battling depression. Not the dramatic kind that screams for help, but the kind that sits in silence, staring out windows for hours, feeling nothing. He drank heavily during those years, disappeared from the public eye for long stretches. There were no official breakdowns, no rehab headlines, just a man slowly fading from himself. "There were years I felt invisible, even to me," he said once, "like I was watching my life happen from far away." He never made his demons public, never exploited them for attention. But those close to him saw it. The mood swings, the retreat, the isolation that came after each film wrapped. It was as if he had nothing left once the role was over. The darkness wasn't new. It had been there since childhood. Abandonment, poverty, loss. Acting was his escape. But even that wasn't enough forever. At the height of his career, Pacino turned down more films than he accepted. He wasn't chasing money. He wasn't chasing fame. He was just trying to survive himself. When he did return to the screen in the late 80s and early 90s, Sea of Love, Glengarry Glen Ross, Scent of a Woman, his performances were sharper, darker, deeper. You could see it, the way his voice cracked, the haunted weight behind his eyes. He wasn't playing broken men, he was remembering them. And that's what made him different. Every tortured scream, every whisper, every pause came from a place of truth. He didn't act grief, he knew it. You bring your wounds to the work. That's how people feel it. But it wasn't just the roles that kept him going. It was the work itself. Acting, even in pain, gave him a reason to wake up, a way to process the chaos inside. He never wanted sympathy. He didn't believe in being saved. What he believed in was the power of storytelling, to heal, to hurt, to remind us we're not alone. And maybe that's why, even now, at 85, when his body slows and his voice softens, he's still chasing the next story. Because in the dark, he learned one thing: the only way out is through. The pain of watching his body fade. Time doesn't care who you are. It doesn't stop for legends, not even for Al Pacino. At 85, the changes are visible. The man once filled with volcanic energy now moves more slowly. His voice, once sharp as a blade, has become softer, more fragile, still powerful, but edged with fatigue. He walks more carefully these days, guarding each step like it might betray him. And in many ways, it already has. Years of stage performances, long shoots, physical roles, and sleepless nights have caught up. Hearing loss has made lines harder to catch. His vision, once fierce and intense, isn't what it used to be. There are moments when he forgets lines on set, times when cue cards are needed, times when assistants linger just off camera, ready to steady him if needed. And yet, he keeps going. "I don't know how to stop," he once said. "Acting is how I stay alive." He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the fame, but he needs the work, the rhythm of it, the structure, the escape. Even now, when his body aches and his memory falters, Pacino continues, because it's all he's ever known. But for fans who grew up with the firebrand of Scarface or the towering presence of Heat, it's heartbreaking to watch. The slowness, the shakiness, the signs of time that not even legends can outrun. In 2022, during a press conference, he seemed disoriented. He fumbled through a speech, lost his train of thought. His team brushed it off. He recovered. But those close to him knew it was a glimpse of the truth. The man who once roared is now whispering. Still, there's grace in that whisper. Because even as the physical strength fades, the soul remains. The eyes still hold weight. The words still land like thunder. He may not have the same stamina, but the gravity of Al Pacino is undiminished. And maybe that's what makes this chapter so difficult to witness. We're not just watching a man grow old, we're watching a fire slowly burn out, and praying it lasts just a little longer. Fatherhood at 83, a controversial new chapter. In 2023, when most people his age were quietly enjoying retirement or reflecting on their legacy, Al Pacino made headlines for something no one expected. He became a father. Again. At age 83, his girlfriend, Noor Al-Falah, 54 years his junior, gave birth to his fourth child. The internet erupted. Commentators mocked. Pundits questioned. Some called it inspiring, others irresponsible. But for Pacino, it wasn't about optics. "It gives me something to wake up for," he told a close friend. "It reminds me I'm still here." And maybe that was the point. Because by then, his days had grown quiet. The house was too still. The echoes of old films, old friends, old regrets, they lingered. But suddenly, there was a new sound. A baby's cry. Not a ghost from the past, but something entirely different, a future. Still, the controversy swirled. People questioned his health, his age, his motives. "Why now?" they asked. "Why bring a child into a world you might not be here to raise?" The public saw a headline, but they missed the heart underneath. This wasn't about defying age. It was about grasping at meaning, about having a reason to keep living when so much had already faded. Pacino had long carried guilt about fatherhood. He'd missed years with his older children, too many birthdays lost to film sets, too many apologies offered too late. And while this new chapter couldn't rewrite the past, maybe it could soften its weight. But reality doesn't pause for redemption. At 83, fatherhood is different. The late nights are harder. The energy comes slower. The body doesn't move the way it used to. He wasn't tossing footballs in the yard or pacing outside classrooms. He was changing diapers with trembling hands, watching from a recliner instead of running beside. Yet, in the quiet moments, there was peace. He spoke of his son with awe, this tiny person who didn't care about fame or Oscars or legacy. A baby who only knew him as Dad. That's what made it beautiful and heartbreaking. Because time, the one thing Pacino never had control over, was already running out. "I won't be around forever," he said softly in an interview, "but I can be present now. That's something." Whether it was selfish or selfless depends on who's watching. But one thing was clear. This late chapter wasn't about scandal. It was about salvation. And for a man who spent his life inside characters written by others, here, at last, was a role that felt fully his, not scripted, not rehearsed, just real. And real was all he ever wanted to be. The last time he took the stage. In 2024, after more than a decade away from live theater, Al Pacino walked onto the stage one last time. It wasn't a blockbuster revival. It wasn't a victory lap. It was something quieter, more intimate, a one-man show, reflective and raw. And as he stood under the lights, something felt different, fragile, final. He fumbled some lines. His voice cracked. He paused often to collect his thoughts. The fire was there, but it flickered. Gone was the storm of Richard III, the roar of Shylock, the fierce poetry of the basic training of Pavlo Hummel. What remained was a man letting go. But the audience didn't care. Every word he spoke, imperfect or not, carried the weight of decades. Each pause was filled with reverence. And when he finished, the room stood, not for the performance, for the person. "I'm not what I was," he whispered to a friend backstage, "but I'm still here." He wept that night, not from sadness, but from acceptance. Because theater was where it all began for him. Before The Godfather, before the cameras, before the myths. The stage was his first home, the place where a lost kid from the Bronx learned he had something to say. And now, in his 80s, he had returned, not to impress, but to say goodbye. He didn't announce it as his final performance. But those who were there knew. You could feel it in the air, like the last note of a song you've heard your whole life. After the show, he stayed behind, long after the crowd had left. He walked the stage slowly, touching the curtains, the floorboards, the walls. He didn't say much, just looked around the empty space like it was an old friend. "This place gave me everything," he once said, "and now I've given it all back." He wasn't bitter. He wasn't broken. He was full. Tired, yes, but full. Of memories, of gratitude, of life. Pacino never wanted to be a legend. He just wanted to speak truths people were too afraid to say. And on that final night, with a fragile voice and a shaking hand, he did it one last time. Not as Michael, not as Tony, not as a character, just as Al, the kid from the Bronx who never stopped chasing something real. The legacy he's leaving behind. When the story of cinema is told, Al Pacino doesn't just have a chapter. He's an entire volume. From the moment he locked eyes with the camera as Michael Corleone, something shifted in Hollywood. He didn't arrive like most stars. He wasn't golden-haired or smooth-talking. He was small, brooding, explosive. A new kind of leading man. Raw, dangerous, fragile. And over 5 decades, he proved one thing again and again. You don't need to be perfect to be unforgettable. His body of work isn't just long, it's mythic. The Godfather, Dog Day Afternoon. Scarface, Scent of a Woman. Heat, The Insider. Angels in America. Every role, a masterclass. Every performance, a piece of him left behind. "I've always tried to live the art," he once said. "That's the only way I know how to do this." He didn't chase popularity. He chased truth. That's why his work endures. It wasn't flashy. It was human, flawed, honest. You felt it in your chest when he spoke, when he broke, when he shouted, when he whispered. Pacino has won an Oscar, Golden Globes, Tonys, Emmys. But the trophies were never the goal. In fact, he once confessed he kept many of them in boxes, tucked away. Because his real reward was never the applause. It was knowing he'd moved people. And he did. Young actors still mimic his monologues. Film students study his silences. Directors quote him like scripture. To be Pacino-esque is to aim for emotional truth, no matter how messy it gets. His influence is everywhere, even if many don't know it. But the legacy isn't just in the films, it's in how he made them. The intensity, the sacrifice, the courage to disappear into roles that left scars. He didn't act to impress. He acted to survive. And as he's aged, he's become something even rarer. A living monument, not frozen in nostalgia, but evolving in real time. Aging before our eyes, slower, yes, softer, sure, but still here, still creating, still giving, still Al. He once said, "Fame fades, but the work, that lasts." And for Pacino, the work was never just acting, it was his life. The final scene and what comes after. Al Pacino knows how stories end. He's played dying soldiers, lonely old men, shattered fathers. He stood in darkness, delivering final words that echoed long after the credits rolled. But now, at 85, it's no longer a role. It's his own final act. He's spoken about death, not with fear, but with clarity. He's written letters to his children, planned his legacy, left instructions, no tributes, no fanfare, just a quiet request. Let the work speak for me, because he doesn't want to be remembered with sadness. He wants to be felt in the scenes, the lines, the moments that made people sit up and say, "That's real." He knows his body is fading. He knows time is short. And yet, he keeps showing up. Not out of vanity, but because, even in the twilight of life, he still has something to say. In recent years, he's started revisiting old films, not for nostalgia, but for closure. Rewatching The Godfather, Scarface, Scent of a Woman. He doesn't critique, he just reflects. "That kid on screen, he was so hungry," he whispered during one viewing. "I still am, just in a different way." He doesn't fear being forgotten. He fears being misunderstood, because people saw the yelling, the fire, the madness. But what they missed was the man beneath it all, the boy from the Bronx who never felt like he truly belonged, even when the world called him a genius. And maybe that's the tragedy. Not that Al Pacino is growing old, but that we're only now beginning to see the depth he's carried all along. When he's gone, the headlines will read like they always do. Legend, icon, master. And those titles will be true, but they still won't be enough. Because how do you sum up a man who didn't just play characters, but let them haunt him? How do you say goodbye to someone who gave us more than cinema? He gave us himself. There won't be a final film that wraps it all up. No perfect closing shot. There'll just be silence. And in that silence, the lingering echo of a voice that changed the world. Raspy, beautiful, unforgettable. Al Pacino won't need an ending, because some stories live forever. Al Pacino gave everything, his soul, his sanity, his youth, to bring characters to life. Now, as the curtain quietly falls, we finally see the man behind the myth. Not a legend, but a life fully lived. And when he's gone, the silence he leaves behind will speak louder than any applause ever could.